Snow Bros. Wonderland by Tatsujin really takes me back. Back to a time when games were simpler, more reliant on charm than visual fidelity, and most importantly, willing to take risks. And if all of that makes you think I'm talking about the late 80s and early 90s, back when the Snow Bros hit arcades and consoles, nope, you'd be wrong. I'm talking the late 90s and early aughts. Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, and Bomberman 64. Keep that one in mind specifically. When gaming shifted from 2D to 3D, and the Snow Bros were nowhere to be seen. But Snow Bros. Wonderland just feels like it belongs in that era. As the Snow Bros, a smaller franchise that has always stuck to a very simple formula, 2D, one screen, eliminate all the enemies and then move on, makes that big leap to the third dimension. Though, clearly looking at the release date, hitting the Switch, PS4, and Steam in 2024, it's a little more than just fashionably late. And despite all of that extra time it had to get ready, it still suffers from a lot of those old growing pains that we've all come to know and love? Maybe? Plus, and real talk here, I think this late jump is super important when it comes to the gaming industry as a whole. But we'll dive into that towards the end for those of you who don't really care. So instead, first, we're gonna find out where on the spectrum the Snow Bros lands in that big 2D to 3D transition. Now, as expected, there's gonna be changes, like big ones, with the biggest and most eye-catching of the lot being the visuals. Though, there's way more here than just swapping from pixels to polygons. This time around, there is a much greater focus on the story, as simple as it is, with slightly animated and fully voiced cutscenes. And what's more, Nick and Tom, the Snow Bros, are back with a whole new look, sporting scarves, linkier builds, and big ol' anime eyes. Ooh, could be worse. Remember Snow Bros 2? Honestly, if I didn't know any better, I'd say that these are completely different snowmen. And that's because they are. Taking place a decade after the events of one of these games. My money's on the Sega version. This Nick and Tom are actually the OG Nick and Tom's children, making them snow cousins, not bros. But you know, that doesn't sound as good. Also, brand recognition, eh. It's also implied that the original bros are... Ow! My childhood. But, long story short, the once vanquished villain has returned, and the Snow Cousins need to put him back in his place. By traveling from world to world, solving puzzles, and putting some very familiar looking enemies on ice.
The Iceman cometh.
In a very familiar, but very different way. Dropping into our first hub world, which utilizes a layout much more akin to Super Mario Bros. 3 than, say, classic Mario Bros. Wonderland spans across 5 different themed areas with individual stages that you can revisit at your leisure for hunting collectibles. The first area is a pretty simple one, just a bunch of snowy plains, and I've got to throw out a little bit of a warning here. The first stage is basically just a single player tutorial, so if you're hopping in with your bro, like I did, they're gonna have to wait. Though they should pay attention anyway, as here's where they teach us the basics of battle. To all my fellow Snow Bros veterans out there, this should all look pretty familiar. But there are some serious differences hidden beneath that'll probably trip you up if you just rely on your old skills. So the goal of each stage is to reach the exit portal, which is usually locked, meaning we gotta find some keys. And to do so, we usually need to complete an objective, which, more often than not, is wiping out all the enemies in a given area. Just like the classics. Though it's not nearly as straightforward this time, thanks to that whole new Z-axis. Which is exactly why we should... Flying cars. Pretty sure the snowman flying that thing is completely irrelevant here though. Now, if you're new to the Snow Bros franchise, in the 2D days, combat worked like this. You'd pummel enemies with snowballs until they were completely coated, then you'd give them the boot. causing the giant snowball to go careening path from path until it crashed at the bottom. All the while, pancaking foes who just happened to be in the way, who also conveniently dropped power-ups and points as a nice little parting gift. And to Wonderland's credit, it absolutely tries to capture that classic Snowbros feel, retaining a lot of the classic moves, like capturing enemies in giant snowballs, colliding them with foes for points, getting caught in the snowball and just riding it around. And it's even got that thing where dollars drop from the sky if you wipe out all the enemies with one ball. And look, the bills even land in super unfair spots too. It's just like the good old days. But look, I'm gonna be honest with you all, it doesn't feel like classic Snowbros. Though that is not for a lack of trying. The music, for example, is just as upbeat and whimsical as ever. And the first world, Snowland, is just updated tunes from the arcade game that, for those of you who are as nostalgic for this franchise as I am, will hit your ears like, yeah, that. Not to mention, all those classic arcade sound effects are a nice touch. Plus, most of the enemies and bosses are just 3D interpretations with similar movesets. This is honestly a very faithful interpretation of the Snowbros world. Still though, if you're really looking for a game that just captures that classic arcade style, you'd be better off playing Bubble Bobble, Tumble Pop, or Snowbros Special. Instead, what Wonderland is, how it feels, really reminds me of Mario, Zelda, Sonic, or Bomberman. Like how we, the fans, all describe these games. 2D Mario versus 3D Mario, top-down Zelda versus 3D Zelda, good Sonic versus bad Sonic. I was kidding with the joke! So it's best to just look at Wonderland as a new type of Snowbros, with Wonderland's biggest change to the formula being a direct result of the visuals. Say goodbye to that 2D side view and hello to a 3D isometric view, which means running around, attacking, and being attacked from all dimensions. And to go along with this new range of movement is a new focus on platforming, exploration, and puzzle solving, alongside the classic combat. Though interestingly enough, it uses the classic combat mechanics for said puzzle solving. Though, in order to keep it from getting stale, it meant that they needed to include a bunch of new moves too. Just like their fathers before them, the cousins can snow cone enemies and just bowl them over, in a much more literal way now. But there's also a huge emphasis on using that snowball for hitting switches or jumping off of them to reach higher platforms. Also, side note, there's usually an item around every puzzle that you could just turn into a snowball that also respawns, just in case you accidentally end up wiping out every single enemy. Which, with all the pinballing around, is certainly easy to do. Now, eventually you'll gain another power-up that helps with traversal, a spinning dive kick, that aside from stunning foes, will allow you to pilot snowballs to hunt them down, as well as using it to get across dangerous terrains, like say, poisonous bogs. And remember how I told you to keep 3D Bomberman in mind? Well, look familiar? Now you can throw giant snowballs to bring enemies down or hit switches. And honestly, it's probably the best method for doing so, as you could be much more precise with your targets. Seriously though, Wonderland definitely has the same kind of vibes that going from 2D to 3D Bomberman has. Now, you unlock all these moves as you progress through the game, but it's just right after the tutorial that you get to let your Snowbros join the fray. But unlike the original games, excluding Snowbros 2, this game is 4-playered. Sadly though, players 3 and 4 are just recolors. Sorry Snowbros 2 guys, you won't be joining us this time around. Ugh, stop showing that! Fortunately for your friends, with the addition of puzzle platforming comes another staple of the genre, Unlockables, including different gear to customize your looks. Huh. So, were those always buckets on their heads? I always thought they were fezzes.
In the name of sanity, have you got on your head?
It's a fez, I wear a fez now. Fezzes are cool.
On top of that, you can unlock power-ups, like more health, longer attack range, larger snowballs, stuff like that to help you customize your playstyle. Though sadly, it comes at a cost, specifically the classic potions, the ones that grant larger attacks or longer attacks or give you a speed boost. They're no longer drops, instead they're just relegated to certain areas. usually with a time limit, so that's kind of a shame, and definitely a part of the reason this doesn't feel like classic snowbros. But hey, the power-ups and items that aren't collectibles can be purchased, using coins that you get from points. So that's a cool way to bring back the arcade style scoring. Still though, like the potions thing, the multiplayer is a bit of a give and take, with the biggest and weirdest and arguably worst aspect being the camera control. Just take a look right here. One player is wearing a crown. Ooh, shiny. But here's the thing. That crown isn't just a status symbol of how I'm an absolute Chad gamer that my friends can only dream of being. No, it also determines which character the camera is following, and can easily be knocked off your head to be claimed by another player. And I do mean your head. I do not get hit in games. I said it, I said in-game! As you could probably guess, the camera issue is a pain for the other players when they end up off screen. Though, you can also take advantage of that too, since off-screen players can now teleport to get back, allowing you to cheese certain areas. In fact, the game doesn't actually seem very fine-tuned for co-op at all. Even ignoring the camera issues, the puzzles, even the really simple line up the enemies and bowl them over ones, really do feel like they were designed with one player in mind. Having a second player either turns every situation into a too many cooks in the kitchen kind of deal, or it makes it just super easy to cheese the puzzle. Though, if you want to see that as a good or bad thing, that's really up to you. But where the co-op is definitely a plus side has to be the combat. Being in an isometric view means that the enemies are attacking from all sides, so being able to divide and conquer really does help, doubly so in the hazardous areas. Other changes compounding on that are that the bros now have energy meters that they need to let recharge or manually recharge if they want to create more snowballs. So don't be too fast on that trigger finger. Also, there are a lot of enemies that take more than one hit to drop, which is technically something that was added to Snow Bros Special, but I didn't really like it there, and it's only a bit more tolerable here. And capping it all off, enemies don't stop when you start caking them with snow like they did in the classic games. I definitely took a couple extra hits when they kept coming at me. I also want to throw out there that the wind mechanic that pushes you around the stage really makes this boss fight blow. Finally, I want to bring up what I mentioned earlier about why I think this game is important for the video game industry. And that revolves around the shiny new graphics, both in what they are and when they are. As confusing as that sounds. To be blunt, Snow Bros Wonderland doesn't really look like a PS4 game that came out years after the PS5 launched. Now, does it? At best, it looks like a mid-generation PS3 game, which, by the way, is not an insult or a dig. While it's lacking that really goofy, bright, and over-the-top zaniness that the old title games just oozed from their being, Wonderland's visuals and world are still charming in their own right, though let's be real, there's nothing particularly special here. Not you. Still, that being said, as of 2025, when this review is being made, there are a lot of issues with the gaming industry going on, with some of the major ones being the cost of making games rising, specifically AAA titles, and the layoffs that come as a result of these games not meeting expectations, which in turn has stunted a lot of companies, making them too scared to try anything new, and ultimately playing it safe with just re-releases, remasters, and sequels. And to be fair, while Snow Bros Wonderland is essentially a sequel, this game is still pretty risky when you really think about it, playing to a very niche audience. But more importantly, it also fulfills what a lot of us are calling for to help resolve this issue with the AAA industry: the return of AA games. Because that's what Wonderland is. It's not cutting edge, it's got a lot of growing pains coming from that shift from 2D to 3D, but it's different. It's taking a risk and trying something new with a classic niche IP, and does so in a fun and charming way, and I appreciate that. But for those of you who don't care about any of that kind of stuff, and just want to play some snowbros, if I haven't made it abundantly clear yet, Snowbros Wonderland, while capturing a lot of what made the classic games great, just doesn't feel like those classic games. Instead, Snowbros Wonderland does its own thing, and it does it well. So here's hoping that, just like the other franchises I mentioned earlier, we end up getting a whole line of brand new 3D, and of course more 2D, Snowbros.